most of you guys know Brian and Samantha Kirby. Brian is also one of our elders at Southern Hills, and for the last year has been serving alongside myself and a handful of others as we've done our best to try to shepherd the church. In an incredibly difficult season over the last few months, and man, what more could we ask for in an elder? Not just a heart for the church, but his knowledge and his abilities and his talents to help lead us through this kind of pandemic. And so Brian's just done an incredible job.
All right. That's enough.
So I know he can't stand it, but I have to prop him up because he's done an incredible job. But of course, Brian has well before this has been heavily involved in Southern Hills. I know he and Samantha are heavily involved in our college ministry, but Brian's also a doctor here in town. Leads his own practice, and personally has helped me tremendously with some back problems I've had. But all that to say, you guys, if you know Brian, and Samantha, they're just hearts of gold, absolute hearts of gold, and love for people around them. So I'm not gonna keep beating that dead horse, Brian, because I could sit here and talk about you all night. But I appreciate all you do for us, man, and I look forward to you guys sharing your stories.
Love you, man. I appreciate the awesome introduction. That is really kind of sweet. I think that anything that I think honestly that anything that you see good in me, you wouldn't probably recognize me from where this story starts to where it ends today. I think that anything that you recognize, I mean, Samantha's been pretty great for a long time, but as far as like the difference between us then and now as a collective sort of one flesh, I think that all those compliments that you did throw away, and it really is humbling. I think that is the difference. The delta there is Jesus in our lives, and so we got to try to boil that down to about 20 minutes, something like that. We got to try to let you guys know a little bit about that, but I hope that we're able to do that. In fact, I hope that as we're talking, and I'm just going to dive right in. Okay. I hope that as we're talking that you do just recognize, and by recognize, I mean like actually see something consistent about the work of God. I hope that you kind of recognize his fingerprints, kind of like how he's worked, and maybe some themes that probably sound familiar to other stories that you've heard, maybe. And I'm not kidding you. I mean, as I look back and as we kind of think over, one of the blessings of getting to do your testimony is you get to obviously look backwards and you get to say, you know what, that sounds like a story that we saw, and hopefully it's not, I don't know, Samson or something like that. I mean, I don't know. Some of these guys don't exactly want to be like, but you see some similar themes at least. And so I think you're actually going to see his fingerprints on our lives. And the reason I say that is because you're going to see how he moved in some very familiar ways, and it's just obvious, like little hyperlinks within our lives that I think will help you to recognize, hey, when I heard, you know what, when you heard maybe a testimony from another, married couple, I know you guys have had a lot of good ones. You've had a lot of, ballers that come on this group and give their testimony. And you may notice that, I kind of recognize this kind of restoration, or this way he took them when they were broken and made something better out of them, or, you may notice something again about, it sort of sound like an Old Testament story, but I hope this whole thing smacks of the new covenant with the gospel of Christ as well. But so I hope that that's something that you do get to see here as we kind of move through. But so I do think that he was there with us from a very early point in our lives. And I think that when we do see and sort of look back at that and we understand his character, it helps us to kind of know what to expect in the future. It helps us to kind of like just trust and hope in him a lot more. It helps us to, like, when we're going through another tough moment, or when we really think we're out of our depth, or when this time really is too much. It helps us to know, look, he was there before. He did this once already. I trust and hope in him again. The faith that I displayed, the faith that I learned maybe back in medical school, and we just need to dive in. but I can use that faith like a muscle. I can use it again now, and so I do think there's kind of like that theme. I want you to just look for God in there. I hope pops out. And I think there's three things that I'm going to say at the beginning. I hope I get the message. I hope we get the message across when we're talking. which is that I do think that marriage is a wonderful vessel that God can use in a lot of effective ways. And I think that very frequently, and this isn't anything universal, obviously, but very frequently it can be stronger than the times when we were single. He can just do some special things sometimes in marriage that open a lot of doors and that speak to different people differently. And frankly, that you might not have been able to pull off, unless, and at least in our case, we wouldn't be able to pull off unless we were married. But sometimes too, because we are going to talk a lot about, some kind of times where things were a little bit dicey for us. Things were definitely, a bit stressful for us. And, I think I want you guys to understand that's actually, of course, when we can hear him most clearly. I think it may have been, I think I saw Kristen and Tyler Woodard, and I know I saw the Coles. I know at one point, what was that book about the chatterbox or whatever? But there's some times where you just kind of drown out the chatterbox. You stop listening to all of this white noise that is meaningless, and you just listen to the creator of the universe for a few minutes because you don't care about anything else for a few moments. And there are going to be some times in our testimony that hopefully we get to kind of convey to you that we're not going to say it out loud probably, but sometimes where we stop the noise. I didn't care anymore about stuff that I thought was maybe important, and that includes Georgia football or my job or whatever it is. The one thing that really mattered was kind of hearing the creator and sustainer of the universe. And so that was he was faithful there. He told us that he would do this kind of thing. He did it. And so I hope that kind of comes through a little bit. And I do think he always has a plan. Look, there's a verse that's kind of difficult for me to, it was difficult for me, and what I'm trying to say in some of the more difficult parts of our lives to really kind of cling to is that, he has a plan to prosper and not to harm us. And there are some times where I felt like I was really hurting. And I think it's only when you kind of get on some of the other side of these things, you kind of look back. He does always have a plan to prosper and not to harm us. So sometimes during those times, clinging to other parts of his word, I think can be super useful. So anyways, that's the scene, I guess.
So it all started in the summer of 1977 at College Park Public Pool. It was love at first sight. Possibly. But Brian and I actually started dating in the summer of 1993. We were in high school, juniors. Right before our junior year. And we've been together ever since then. We've never broken up, never thought about it, nothing. And when we started dating, I was not a Christian and Brian was not walking out his faith at the time. And it would be hard to say that being a Christian or a non-Christian would have really made a difference in how we lived our day-to-day lives. We graduated from high school, and then we went on to UGA together. And then after college, we married, and we moved to Augusta for Brian to attend medical school.
Yeah. And so this was, while we had, like Samantha said, we had been exposed to the gospel. We had, friends, or whether it was a summer camp or, some family. I wouldn't, like you said, I don't know if there was going to be a lot of, I think God needed to move in a bigger way in our lives. I'll put it like that. And when I first got to medical school, the first semesters, it's not that you haven't weeded out a lot of people, but it's almost like this one last weed out session. And it's an exceptionally difficult semester. It's a semester that's very intensive in anatomy classes and labs. And so you're kind of given, this may gross out some people, but you're kind of given, along with a few other medical students, a body. And so you have an anatomy lab where you spend a tremendous amount of time, many times for consecutive days. Sorry, that was a little bit morbid. I should have probably warned like Heath and Brooke and our guys, Andy. Anyway, so we got that part. We had a very intense anatomy lab. We'll leave it at that. And there were some just super long hours. I wouldn't come home for extended periods of time. Samantha would try to entice us home with cookies or video games or movie or something like that. But for the most part, it was just a tremendous amount of time. It was an exhausting period. Now I got out of that semester towards top of the class, doing really well right there, kind of single digits, top of the class, but there was something not sustainable about it. And it felt empty. And so I wanted to kind of prove myself amongst all of these other guys that I really respected, that was going okay, but there was something really missing. And around that time, I got to meet a guy and David Daniel and a good friend of mine from UGA, Justin Hemrick, had met him really, and he introduced us. Started playing basketball. Eventually kind of went to a medical campus outreach. And if that sounds familiar, like campus outreach over West Georgia, it's because it is very similar model. And so we got to go to this medical campus outreach meeting and listen to the pediatric emergency physician there give a speech, and that's when he said, he recited the verse of Philippians 4:6-7. And just, I know we all know this, but it's worth just mentioning it, because he said, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. It's always key. Let your requests be known to God. And the peace, that's the key part for us, that God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And the peace stood out to us at that time. I would not say we had a ton of peace at the time. There was a little bit of trouble of like, is this really going to be our life for a while? Do we really want to move in this way? And we kind of decided, no, that's not really what we want to do. They invited us onto a mission trip in Peru. We said no. We said no about 12 times. And they said, listen, why don't you just say yes? And if you get the money, you can go. We said, fine, but we're not going to get the money. And then the money came, and so we had to go now because we kind of committed. They totally tricked us. And so we went into, I said Peru. I meant to say Venezuela. We went to Venezuela. We've been to Peru too. But we went to Venezuela, Merida, Venezuela. And at that time, while we were serving these guys, and you think you're going down there helping somebody else. I think anybody who's been on a mission trip is going to tell you the same thing. You think you're going down there to help other people. It's the very opposite. You're the one that's being worked on. God is working on your heart. And that's exactly what happened. We surrendered our lives. Literally, we had a mountaintop experience. We were at the very top of the Andes. It's super cliche. We could see, like, I don't know, Africa from, where we were. It was so far away. We were so high. But it was a mountaintop experience, and we had to reconcile with the fact that things were going to be different when we came down off that mountain. And so we had been changed. And I guess what was what that kind of symbolized for us is this start of like a rebuilding process that God was doing in us. He was drawing near to us. He was showing us a new path, and it was really showing us, that we would need a stronger knowledge of Him to experience that peace. We would need a stronger knowledge of His Word to experience peace, and that there might even be some struggles that we weren't like facing in that moment, but that were ahead of us. And now I wouldn't know that at the time, but we were learning what faith was all about. We were learning what the fruits of the Spirit were. We were learning about what it meant to be faithful and how there was an evidence to that. Well, instead, we had a lot of evidence in the moment, but it was very important to us to kind of learn more about this God, because we were seeing a lot of consistency, a lot of truth. It rhymed with, what was happening in reality for us, and it was changing us. And so, we just felt like, children of His, and I know He cared about us a great deal. It seemed obvious to us, and it felt easy for us to just kind of start educating ourselves about Him. And little did we know, but He was preparing us.
So from there, we both started attending Bible studies, and our faith grew. Neither one of us had really suffered in life, though. And we both came from very good, loving families. And a few years into marriage, we were ready to start a family. But our timing was not God's timing. And suffering came to the tune of 5 years of infertility. It was just an uphill battle of trusting God. We had to learn that He is sovereign and in control, not us. And Hebrews 11:1 is what got us through that time. So faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Going through fertility treatments is tough, though. Your body is poked and prodded. Your emotions are everywhere. You're excited. You're nervous. You're fearful. You're anxious. It's just a roller coaster. And you have to learn to lean on Him and let Him work on your heart. And you just need that peace from Philippians.
Yeah. Well, we did finally get pregnant, and it was twins. And the excitement in that moment was absolutely massive. I think my mom I think embodied this as much as anyone. She hopped on a plane from Atlanta to Houston. We were living in Texas at the time. And she came out there. She had suitcases full of baby shower type presents, whatever. They're already all wrapped, one for each week, a couple of dozen open immediately. The excitement was there. But around week 21, we lost both twins. This is just a couple of weeks even before viability. We lost both twins, and in those moments, there was some. That was our first evidence, perhaps, of what the body of Christ, what God and His promises, what it really means in action. And so there was a pastor there, the prototypical Texan, Ray Metter, just a good old country Texan pastor. He was there for us, and he held our hands. He was the hand and feet of God, but he literally held our hands and literally, was with us and spoke with us, and I think had some really, really powerful words for us in the right times. Our Sunday school stepped up. Now Sunday school has become, and then, because of moments like that, these become friends for life. These are guys that we still, I would call some of our best friends in the world, even though they're scattered to the winds. I think that all of this stuff, though, that we had just been studying for the previous, like she said, about 5 years or whatever, we were starting to see some of the fruit of why God had been working on us from the beginning, just to prepare us for a moment like this.
So after more rides on the infertility roller coaster, God blessed us with another pregnancy, and again it was twins. So this pregnancy went fairly smoothly. At this point, Brian was finishing his residency, and we were moving to Carrollton, Georgia. I moved back a few weeks early before Brian to kind of get the house settled and be ready for bed and rest for the last trimester. But within a few days, I went into labor. I was having contractions, and I drove myself to Tanner at 5 in the morning and found out that my twins were on their way. Just hoped I needed fluids, but I did not. So Brian hopped on the next plane out of Houston, and he made it in time. Luckily, they were able to hold him off 60 hours, and they were able to get needed steroids into their lungs. And
that's them. Everybody look at Heath's screen or whatever it's doing.
So finally, Asa Walker was born at 7:04, and Elijah John was born at 7:20 on June 8th, 2007. And late that night, they were transferred to the NICU at the Grady. And so we spent the next 5 weeks traveling back and forth to Grady, and it was, it was hard.
That was a tough time.
It was hard to leave them and go visit them, and we weren't supposed to hold them very much, and we just had all these limitations. They were across the NICU from each other, and so my first rule for them was that you can't cry at the same time because mommy can't be in both places.
Yeah, they kind of obeyed that rule.
Yeah, they did a very good job.
I had to practice. I was starting to have to study for boards. That was a tough time.
But our family and friends across the country just started praying. And we started a blog so everybody could keep in touch. That was before texting and Facebook. And God was just faithful. He sustained us through that time. They were transferred back to Tanner on our anniversary, and we were able to go see them more. Brian could stop by during the workday and see them. They came home at just 36 weeks gestation. And for the next year, we stayed at home so that they wouldn't get sick, being so premature. And they did not. By 5 months, they were caught up with their same age peers, and they were just our chunky monkeys. Asa was our olive-skinned, inquisitive, and headed for a long career as a male model.
It's true.
And Eli was named after Brian's grandfather. And he was just like Brian's dad in appearance and goofiness, and they were just perfect.
They're really good boys, and we were really soaking it up at this point. I think, hey, another picture. So Asa. So if anyone can see the picture, Asa is on. Samantha's holding Asa, and had these kind of curly locks there, And like I said, the skin was just, it would tan just in 10 minutes. He'd turn to this perfect golden tan. Eli got a little more of my skin, but was hilarious and quite a good baseball player. Was heading right into it. Had a beautiful left-handed swing. So, I mean, for us to be soaking this up, like I said, they caught up with their peers. They had, really were quite healthy. Asa had a touch of asthma, but, that happens, right? That's no great flaw. They were normal. They're like, our testimony was set. Like, we knew we had a testimony forever in these boys. This was, whatever they would become, was just going to add to that testimony. We just didn't know what that was yet. And I remember actually one time, so we practiced a little something that we call in the Kirby family tough love. And there's sometimes when you put the kids to sleep, that you just need to walk away, and you need to let them fall asleep and have a little cry. And so we did that one night. We came out to this spot right where we're sitting, right in this exact spot that we're sitting. And I remember I sat there, looking out of my back porch, and back porches and just the beauty of God's creation kind of bring out into you a bit of humility, and you just think, we do not deserve all this. We are beating the system right now. I just remember saying that. We are beating the system. We got that testimony. God is so good. And, it's tough. I mean, sometimes I kind of wonder if Satan doesn't, sometimes see us when we're at that kind of high point, and kind of wonder if maybe this is a good target. I don't know. Maybe this is a guy that is enjoying God a little too much. I don't know. I mean, maybe I read a little too much of Screw Tape Letters, by C.S. Lewis there, but it just seemed like, it was like, this was a moment where we were on just riding a high, and I don't think he liked it. I'm certain that he didn't like it, but he didn't like it, but we were enjoying our relationship with God. But at 2 years, 3 months, and 13 days after that point, just right behind me, where I'm sitting right now, just inside these walls, while we slept downstairs, a thunderstorm, arose around us, and it was a remarkable day for many families. But the thunderstorm damaged our HVAC unit, and both our boys were killed in their sleep because of the damage and the fact that it led to an overheating of the upstairs. And for a moment, Satan had himself won himself a good little battle. We don't commonly kind of go into a lot of the details of that night, and if you'll just kind of excuse us for the most part, it's less important to me about the details, beyond what I guess I've already mentioned, and more about the fact that, this was a moment that, again, a lot changed. I mean, there was a lot of hope that we had kind of tied up in our little boys. And, a lot of our faith in God, and our testimony we thought was tied to them. We knew we were, I mean, I don't think I have to explain it. It was very obvious that everything was going to be rocked. Everything from our relationship to God, our faith, our purposes here in general on earth, our marriage, everything was going to be rocked.
And just looking back, we think that God gave them to us 3 months early, so we would have them those extra 3 months.
And while everything did change, I don't think God did. There were hopes that were completely unchanged. There were some that were gone. I hope to be sitting, just a few feet from here, teaching our sons to, throw a ball, how to do some math, a lot that we didn't get to do with Ace and Eli. It was gone. But God was not done with us, and I can't emphasize that enough. He drew nearer to us in those moments than he ever had before. Now, I'm not saying that he wasn't ever there. I'm saying that he had been clear in some of his message for us to prepare us for this, but he drew near to us in a way that we could actually palpably feel him in a way that is difficult to share with you, and only in a lifetime can I possibly help you understand how life-changing it is to experience God in that way. I think, in fact, that is the whole point of it. If everyone ever asked me what I think the meaning of life is, I think a lot of people would say this. It's to know our Creator, it's to enjoy Him, right? I think there's a catechism that says something along those lines. For the 9 months after that, which is, I guess, kind of ironic because it's all our infertility problems and the 9 months, I can say, especially for about 9 months, and when I look back, I know that I knew God and walked with God in a way that few ever got to, and I know that God and and myself and my sons are even honored by just the ability to say that we have that relationship with God. It's no small deal. I guess maybe I've hammered the point home too much, but it's a big deal to understand and know God and walk with Him in that way, because it changes everything else that we're going to tell you. Now, the rest of the people that stepped up in times past, like when we lost our first set of twins, stepped up again. So all of our friends in Texas, our Show Hills pastors, our life group, the Coles, JJ and Christine Cole over there. I know there are more than one Coles right now, but JJ and Christine, they were there for us. And I remember my mom giving me a book of just important verses, like in a little journal kind of a thing that I would sometimes flip through. I remember a friend of mine, Chad Connor, is an orthopedist out in Texas right now. I remember asking him one day that I just wasn't sure, because my sons were never, they never said a prayer of faith. Are they in heaven? And that was something that bothered him. He's a strong Christian. He couldn't go to sleep without having that question answered. And so he sent me back within a couple of, I can almost say a couple hours, but a couple of days, a pros and cons kind of a list, a yes and no kind of a list of why they may be in heaven and why they may not, and all these verses from either side. And I'll give you a hint. It was about 4 or 5 dozen yeses and about one single verse that maybe suggested no, they weren't. And so I got very interested, obviously. I think we both did, and interested in learning about. So I felt like we were still parents to these children, and we're very interested in knowing where they were, just like a parent of a teenager, I guess. And I want to learn about heaven in a new way. And you know what? I pity the man that doesn't think about heaven frequently. And so that was important for us to kind of go through that, to understand where we were going, what our eventual goal was. God had kind of laid some foundations and was starting to show it. He hit count, and kind of now had a carrot there at the end for us to work towards in His presence, and also just to kind of be with our kids again. But I did understand our previous years in a different way. I did understand what it means to lose a son. I got to speak to people just today about losing a son. They lost a son 2 weeks ago. 2 patients after that who lost her husband. It's the anniversary. I know what it means now to lose a son. I know what it means for God to voluntarily give up His son. It's a big deal, because unlike me, He did it voluntarily. And but I can say at least that my separation from my sons isn't final, and because of the gift of Jesus' son. So He's keeping them in His presence right now. Their mission here on earth was in a way complete, but has extended it as well. But it's worth asking at this point, like, what happens next, right? I mean, that's the whole point of our testimony, really, is what happens next. So is all that stuff I saw with the last 9 months or whatever, Him being close to us. So is this the same God of the Old Testament and the New Testament? Is He a God of restoration? Does He abandon His promises? Does He start maybe kind of pulling back a little bit on our calling? Maybe that calling that we had interpreted for us to be parents was a mistake. Maybe He can now pull back on that. Maybe is He even powerful enough to kind of, because if we'd already had trouble, getting pregnant, and we'd had an extremely traumatic, kind of delivery, we're older. I wanted to do the math for you about how it's going to be very difficult for us to conceive another child. Could He even use our broken hearts for His kingdom again? And there were a few verses that were just incredibly important to us. I'll just kind of, if I can just say just one, that once again, it's Psalm 34. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. And we got to feel that amongst some other verses as well.
So it's hard to begin fertility treatments again, as we did not welcome the ups and downs again. So we prayed just, you know, we weren't successful several times. And so we just prayed, you know, God, if you don't want us to be parents again, we need you to take that want out of our hearts. And he didn't. So we continued pursuing fertility treatments. And God blessed us with our baby of hope, Crawford Joseph. And
on the front.
and then he had a very small likelihood of success, as medical professionals would say.
The doctors literally told us not to bother putting him in because there was a very, very low chance, single-digit chance that he would survive, that it was better just to discard. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And we said, no, that's a life. Please, you know, we're going to take that life. And God blessed us with Crawford. And then God has a funny sense of humor and decided to surprise us with Solomon Daniel. And his name is Solomon because he's our baby of peace, Shalom. And both of them have, well, just God restored us. He, you know, gave us 2 boys again and just restored us and gave us peace.
I think it's important to say, like, it's not that he replaced in any single way, right? There's nothing about replacing those 2 boys that we were talking about. There's a restoration, however, that I hope is extremely familiar about all of our broken, sinful lives, and the way that he's able to bring us into our God is a God of restoration. I don't have to give you examples of that. I think you guys know one after another.
From there, God used our lives and marriage in unexpected ways. He called Brian to leave his medical practice as an anesthesiologist for a year and open the door to go to University of Virginia for a pain medicine fellowship. And it allowed him to be closer to people who were suffering spiritually and physically. He's called us to witness to other students, the college students who are on the lookout for how God might be preparing them for big things and maybe big twists and turns in their walks in this fallen world. He's called us to personally walk with other parents who have needed to say goodbye to their children, and through biblical counseling at Southern Hills and just word of mouth as well.
But it is exceptionally important that God really achieved these things through the avenue of our marriage. And it was a well-prepared marriage. I hope that I've said that. But for like a decade, we have been learning about the meaning of a relationship to God and to each other. And to say that we would have survived this without each other is being a bit bold. There's a foundation that had been laid for us to start moving towards God and therefore moving towards each other, about learning who the source of our love was, that there was a perfect love that we had in God, the way that God loved us, that we could kind of, model and learn from, and just keeping the gospel a little more central to our marriage. That is not to say we haven't had any flaws, right? But being able to recenter our marriage and maybe even restore our marriage and prepare us for this. It is worth a little bit considering what might have been, right? I can't actually tell you that without Christ, without the gospel, without God's, again, preparation, without him kind of helping us to be more faithful, that we wouldn't have sunk into a deep depression. That would have been a very reasonable thing to do. We could have embraced anger. We could have gotten divorced. We could have sought a fresh start apart from each other or in a new city. We could have, it's hard to even be so bold as to say that without the completely transforming message of the gospel, that we would even be here talking to you today, that we would be allowed to be here talking to you today. That is presumptuous. I know that there's another couple that was affected in the exact same way we were that night by that same thunderstorm, and had a child of like exactly the same age as Ace and Eli killed that night. And we knew their parents, or the husband's parents. I did. And they did not do well. And they faced those choices with a different worldview. They did get divorced. They did lose their jobs. They did face severe and extreme depression. I bring this up to try to just tell you how incredibly humbled I am that God did choose to prepare us for that moment. And that we listened. And that, again, I'm just grateful for what could have been. It helps me to understand what could have been. So I guess I want to be clear about something that in the months following the passing of Ace and Eli, before I kind of leave you, in the months following Ace and Eli, they were the most painful months ever. The silence around this house was absolutely deafening. But to this very day, I sincerely miss that time with God. It has propelled me forward, and I know it has Samantha too. I'm sorry when I keep using I. It's one of the first times I think we've actually given our testimony. Well, maybe not the only one, but we usually give it kind of individually, but side by side. So it's propelled us from that moment. Everything has changed because of hearing a Philippians verse, having the Holy Spirit rest on our hearts to respond to it, and then understanding more, like, and living it out, what God's faithfulness could be like in our marriage and for us personally. And so that when in the high times, we would understand that every good and perfect thing was from him, and in the low times, we know that he's right there with us.
So our prayer tonight is that you know with more certainty that God's pattern of creation, love, and restoration, blessing, and proximity to us, just like we see in the Bible, are very much what we've experienced in our lives as another child of his. That's what happens when you read. Just like we see in the Bible, are very much what we've experienced in our lives, and are likely what you, as another child of his, will experience in your lives and marriages.
True.